Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming at you again, live from Film Fanatic headquarters here in the big city of Northport, Maine. It's about 12:20. This is my third snow day from work. I started working earlier this year part-time at the Montessori school, which is an amazing place. It's one of the coolest jobs I've had. Work with, basically hang out with young kids, and hang out with I'm part of the aftercare department, and I basically hang out with kids, and we play games and stuff until the parents come, and we do activities, do snack, and all various things around that. Lately, we've been taking the kids out sledding. There's a couple of really sweet hills in the back of the building. We have there's a just a really amazing, sprawling piece of property that Montessori owns. So we've been doing that, and today is the third snow day. It is snowing like nobody's business right now. It's coming down so hard. I think there's almost a foot of snow on the ground right as it is, or as it was from like 11 this morning, and it stopped for about 20 minutes to a half hour, and then it just started snowing again. It's snowing even harder, so we're getting hit hard with snow. It's pretty nice. It's all light and fluffy. So yeah, good day to talk about movies and a good day to watch movies. So yeah, here we are again. Yesterday, and again, I want to thank everybody for their support. If you like these videos and listening to me talk about movies that I really care about, please like and subscribe to this channel. Always impressed, and I'm always excited. It always fires me up and gives me even more enthusiasm to do more and more of these shows. I usually do a video every day, every morning, or at some part of part of the day. I usually do them in the morning, and it's a real, I don't know. It's kind of well, it's fun. At the end of the day, it's just fun, but it's also like therapy for me. It's very cathartic, and I love talking about it. I notice if I don't do it, I miss it. I miss it deeply during the day. So I'm at a point now where it's like automatically I have to do a video. It's kind of funny, and I love that the thing too that gives me even more enthusiasm for doing this channel and these videos and doing them every day and trying to get the quality, you know always at a higher level, and trying to get things more, some of the points that I'm trying to make around some of the certain films, trying to get that a little bit more cohesive. So one of the reasons, or one of the things that keeps me inspired to keep doing this all the time is the amount of people that have been checking out a lot of these videos. And again, I want to thank everybody for doing so. A lot of friends that I know and a lot of people I don't know. And I've also been in contact with a lot of folks who have been commenting on videos on, in the YouTube universe. And that's been really, really cool. And I really, really enjoy that factor of it. That's probably my aside from me doing these interview segments that I really love doing, that's, the most enjoyable part of it is sharing ideas with other film fanatics, or. So, and at the end of the day, it's always about the films. But what I was saying, I'm always surprised by the films that seem to get the most coverage on this channel, and it tends to always be like 99% of the time. It's always videos on the the most kind of obscure movies that I have in my collection. You know, uh, Particularly in the exploitation world, I'm always surprised by those films get more hits and coverage than anything else that I do, and it's inspiring that there's people out there that actually care about this weird stuff. One example of it that I'm just really blown away by is I've been doing some movies or I should say I've been buying a lot of his films, but one of my favorite directors, Jess Franco, who is a, you know, in the underground or exploitation world, he's kind of a world renowned film director in that respected field. You know, in the exploitation, horror realm, the giallo realm. He was, you know, he's a Spanish director. He's still alive, but he is, out of all of the directors that I love, and there's so many, a list that would be too big to really do a show on or to even really probably talk about, although that would be a fun thing. I have to say that Jess Franco is probably the most prolific director I have ever come across in my entire life, and in my entire life as far as being a lover of film. And that just doesn't apply to, say, the world of exploitation. I mean, just in general, it's staggering. And I've been buying some of his films. I grew up watching. There were a few of his films that I remember seeing back in the VHS days because of, you know, the kind of the graphic nature of a lot of his films, particularly the horror films that he did, or films that had very much a horror element. One movie in particular that I grew up watching, I used to see it a lot as a kid, was Faceless, starring Telly Savalas. Just an amazing movie. I recently bought that on Blu-ray. And when I started, and there's been a handful of other movies that I remember seeing as a kid, of Jess Franco movies, but I didn't at that time. And again, it was one of those things where I would be in the aisle of a video store that I was at when I was a kid. You know, always going down the horror section and seeing all the covers and all of the horror artwork for, you know, the horror films and the science fiction films and all of these, like, you know, kind of seedy exploitation films. The artwork would always speak to me, and I would always seek out the one that had the most, outrageous artwork. And Jess Franco was one of those directors. And at the time, I remember seeing, you know, quite a few of his movies as a kid on VHS. But I was so young at the time that I had no idea really who Jess Franco was, and, you know, it was something I never really paid attention to. You know, other directors like Lucio Fulci, who is, you know, probably definitely one of my all-time favorite directors, and probably my favorite director in the exploitation world, as far as like horror. Same thing with him. I saw many of his films, a lot of his films growing up, but I never, like, you know, sought out or like took note of, oh, this is Lucio Fulci, and because I was so young. And now, as I've gotten older and I've gotten really into collecting a lot of these movies, that's something I really pay attention to. And so when I rediscovered, and I've been buying quite a few Jess Franco movies on Blu-ray, and I've been doing more research and finding out a lot more about him, and all of the Blu-rays I've been buying of his stuff, they have just a tremendous amount of special features, and there's all this great, amazing information about him. That's when I realized, wow, like, to a degree, I haven't even really scratched the surface with him. I mean, he was responsible for, like, you know, roughly 120, 130 movies. Like, it's just completely insane. And it seems like every month there's like a new Jess Franco movie being released. I mean, it's just crazy. And people on the outside, you know, like people that are not maybe into movies of that nature, like the exploitation world, might not know who he is, but they probably have, like, heard about maybe one or two of his films, or, you know, they might have seen the artwork to one of his films, because all of his stuff is like really iconic, and it just has that image that just like draws you in on a lot, you know, especially around the artwork of his films. But outside of, say, the people who are into the kind of the cult style of filmmaking, most people have no idea who he is. But within that realm, he's like worshipped like a god. And for me, he's one of those directors. So it's been super cool buying his movies, but then realizing, holy mackerel, like there's so many movies of his that I haven't seen. I'm getting more well versed in a lot of his work, but it's just unbelievable. And easily, hands down, the most prolific director I've ever come across. The only other director that I can think of that rivals that, I mean, and again, there's a lot of brilliant, amazing filmmakers that I love that have huge, a huge collection of films that they've made. But the only one I think, as far as the sheer numbers and the amount of quantity, quality of stuff that's out there, is, again, one of my favorite directors of all time, Akira Kurosawa, famous Japanese director. He has something like 80 to about 100 films, and there's still quite a few of his films I have not seen and I don't own. But when I got into the Jess Franco thing, I've like, holy mac, like unprecedented. Like I've never seen anything like it. How prolific somebody was. And the thing that's so surprising is like, so I've been doing more coverage of his films, and I've been buying them slowly. I got, I don't know, maybe about 7 or 8 of his films, roughly, of Jess Franco films now on Blu-ray. I've noticed like I have one of his films that I did some coverage on, and it has like 50,000 views, and I'm just like, what? Like that's great and it's crazy, but I'm like this, you know, that's, to me it kind of blows my mind that there's like people actually caring about this stuff, and a lot of people do know about this. And like I've done many times on the show, like I try to mix things up. I try to do some specialty shows where I'll focus on things that are, very specific, or they might not be about a specific movie, but I try to do some specialty shows. I do the interview segments, and I also cover a lot of newer films. And it's crazy because like I've done a couple of things about James Cameron, for instance, and I also did a big review on Avatar and The Way of Water, the sequel that just came out. And if you take James Cameron and Jess Franco as directors, I both like them a lot. Jess Franco, I love. I feel like everything I've seen of his, I just, uh, just enamored with. And with James Cameron, it's it's pretty mixed. There's a few of his films that I love, absolutely love, but there's also a lot of his films I don't really care that much about. So I would say I'm more of a Jess Franco fan at the end of the day. But at the same time, I love the big Hollywood budget, uh, format also. And it's funny because I'll like, even, when I put up these videos, like I'll have a Jess Franco movie, and right next to it, like for instance, like I did a show on Avatar 2, The Way of Water, and that video on Jess Franco, which is like right next to it, or was done the same week, has way more hits than this massive mega blockbuster movie. And it's like, it's crazy. Like has way more of the Jess Franco thing, or Jess Franco films, or film, this one in particular, gets way more hits, and it's crazy. And I had mentioned that to a friend, where I was like, wow, like that's so bizarre. Like, that's great and everything, but I'm so surprised. I figured it would totally be the other way around. And she was saying, well, I think it's because, like, you take, for instance, a movie like Avatar, where it's everywhere. It's like talked about. Everybody and her grandmother is chiming in about it. It's on everybody who's got a microphone is talking about it. Whereas, like, something like Jess Franco, there's maybe a couple of people out there talking about Jess Franco. So it's something else, and it's so surprising, and it's wicked cool. So that idea or fact that happens with, you have like, a super high Hollywood highbrow film or filmmaker who, and then versus a filmmaker who is like works in this like seedy kind of underground realm. That, and I cover both of those guys. That Jess Franco would get way more hits is so surprising to me. I remember I did it. I also did a show where I've done, like I mentioned before. I try to mix things up. I do like specialty shows where I've done a couple of shows where I've done videos on just directors. I did a show about Stanley Kubrick a while back, and he's my all-time favorite filmmaker by far. And then I also did a show on James Cameron, who I have a deep, affinity for in a lot of ways, and I'm, very familiar with a lot of his films. And then I also just did a show where I talked about certain films that more or less make a lot of money, but when you dig into it and you realize, wow, they're just kind of really ripping off other films. So I try to mix things up that way. But at the end of the day, getting back to what I said, it's the coverage of these like really obscure, kind of bizarro movies that get the most hits. So it's super cool. And one of the things too that, well, I remember years and years ago, I was like I've said, I attempt to have a music career in my little world, and I've been fortunate enough to do some cool musical things in my life, and there's some things I'm really proud of. But it's like everything. I feel like it is what it is. I think you can, kind of, if you have a lot of focus and you believe in, kind of working hard, you can still, like, you can really, kind of create or come close to creating that reality that you kind of want to live in. So music is one of those things for me, or I've always tried to, it's something, well, like this show, for instance. I feel like everything is a work in progress. I always try to have a deep sense of humility around things, and I always try to have a mindset of the consummate student, of where you just never stop learning. And you're always trying to, or at least for me, I'm always trying to acquire maybe some new tools to further my way of how I express myself. And I always feel like that's always this constant thing that's always, that I'm sometimes struggling with, but then it's something that's always motivating me too. You're always your own worst critic, so that's a big thing for me. But I remember, like, when I first started playing in the area, and I was playing, more, quote unquote jazz gigs, and I was playing with this one really great bass player. I was fortunate enough to play some gigs with this guy Caleb Sweet, who I just recently kind of reconnected with. A fabulous bass player. This was a long, long time ago. I was playing some gigs with him. I was playing in a band with him for a while, and then after that, like a regular steady band, and then after that, we started doing these a few like pickup gigs, gigs outside of that band with some other people. And I remember this one gig in particular that we played. And again, this is a long time ago. We were playing at some, I don't know, we had like a little jazz gig where we were playing at this little restaurant or cafe or something, and it was in Belfast. And I knew Caleb pretty well at the time, and he was a super killer player back then, and he is now. He's just a monster. But he was a really great player, and he was really young at the time. And he eventually went to Berkeley and I believe graduated from there, and he's a monster. But I haven't seen him or actually played with him in a long time, and that would be a lot of fun. But anyway, I remember at this one gig we were like we got done setting up our stuff, and we were kind of getting ready to play our set or whatever. and Caleb had his phone, and he had, I believe it was right around, when things started, well, technology started to shift dramatically at that point. But people had, for a long time, people had the track phones, and then the flip phones were a big thing. And then after that, the BlackBerry phone came out, or BlackBerry phones came out, and then after that, it was the iPhones, and then it just grew into what we have now. But I remember it was like right when Blackberries had come out, and he had one, I believe, on him, and he was like watching some videos or something, and he was like saying, and I remember asking like, "What are you watching?" And I thought he was like watching just like some music videos. He's like, "No, there's this thing that I've been obsessed with lately. That I just discovered, and it's called YouTube." I was like, "What is that?" And I remember he told me, he's like, "Yeah, YouTube is like," he felt was like the greatest invention to ever, hit the world. And he basically said, also being, a fan, if you're a fan of music or whatever, you can, uh, you have access to so much information. And he was saying too, like for him, it was a thing of like bands or musicians that he loved or listened to for years. Now he could look them up online and see videos of them actually performing. And I had never heard of it before. And I remember diving into it, and I was just like, oh my God. And then next thing I know, I was obsessed with watching YouTube, and it was amazing. And it can be, detrimental to your mental health to a degree because it's a rabbit hole, and we're all like, we all have parts of our personality where we get really obsessed by things. Definitely myself included, but since I've been doing this channel, I've been, watching more YouTube videos, and I've been in correspondence with more people who are doing shows, and then people who comment on shows and all those things. And it's been really great. It's been a lot of fun. And I've been learning a lot about the whole kind of thing, the whole medium. And I've also come across a few guys that I think are just totally awesome. One guy in particular, and his first name is Dante, and he has a YouTube channel called 10 Room Bizarro. And it's, the way you spell it is 10 ROOMBIZARRO. 10 Room Bizarro. And his first name is Dante. And I randomly came across him when I was on YouTube one day. I came across his he had a video. It popped up in my feed. I think I had just posted one or two videos of Jess Franco on Film Fanatic, and on my feed it came up as 10 Room Bizarro, and I noticed that this guy was talking about Jess Franco. I was like, oh wow, cool. Like, and most of the videos that I look up and YouTube guys, I tend to like, I mean, I look up all kinds of crap like everybody, but mostly they're, obviously music or film related things. But for film stuff, I tend to really mostly watch YouTube guys that are doing shows on exploitation movies or horror movies. So I checked out his show, and I was just like, this guy is awesome. And he's one of my favorite guys. He's probably my out of like new discoveries as far as YouTube content creators and people who have just in general like that have YouTube channels. He's probably my favorite discovery, and I think he is, pretty much the smartest guy I know right now. And he covers a lot of obscure movies, like a lot of Jess Franco films, but all kinds of like obscure exploitation movies. And but he is super knowledgeable, and he commented a few times on a few of my videos, and I've responded to them, and we've kind of talked back and forth over the last few months. And he's a super cool guy. But I highly recommend checking out his channel, 10 Room Bizarro. It's super cool, super informative. It's fun, and I find it's a thing too where a lot of the movies that he talks about, aside from maybe some of the Jess Franco films and maybe a handful of the other films, most of them I have never heard of, don't know anything about. So and I've gotten turned on to a lot of cool films from him. One in particular is Walker, which is a newer film, which is like a really strange trip of a movie. It's kind of like a modern day contemporary vampire movie, but it's so uh, unorthodox. But it's a very cool movie. And that was one movie he talked about. It was a new movie, and I bought that in the store at Blue Moose about a month ago, and it's an awesome movie. And it's going to be a future show. So most of the videos I see on his channel, I've never yeah most of the movies I've never heard of. So it's super interesting. I think it's and he's super entertaining. I feel like it's a video channel or a YouTube channel show where you could just watch it to just listen to him talk. He has a really great kind of aura around him, and he's really passionate, and it's great. And I've actually sent his links to one or two friends, and one in particular who's not really into films so much, and she finds it relaxing to watch and to just listen to, and it's very cool. So who knows? Maybe we could do a show where I could get him on the as a guest because that might be pretty sweet because he's got a world of knowledge going on. So, but anyway, so this show I'm really excited about. This is a movie. Speaking of movies I grew up watching, and speaking of movies that I used to watch as a kid, particularly in the VHS days, this movie was an absolute obsession with me for as a kid, and that is Ninja 3: The Domination. Such a classic movie from my childhood. Such an entertaining movie. Such a terrible movie at the same time. But it's, I believe, cliches or even cliched sayings exist because they're kind of true. But this is like a perfect example of something that's so bad that's so good. You know, I I'm I've never done any shows on them, and eventually I probably will. But I always had a love for martial arts movies. I've done all kinds of. I mean, I've seen. You know, Bruce Lee is one of my idols. I did a show about where I mentioned him pretty heavily as being one of my biggest personal inspirations, and in many ways, he's definitely one of those guys. I remember doing a show where I talked about that, and it was like the three people that I feel, for me, that are the most influential, just personally and even artistically, that help inspire me. And it's a pretty wacky list, but it's three guys, and it's basically Bruce Lee, one of the masters, and one of probably the most innovative figures in the martial arts world. And he just made it's such kick-ass movies. And the second being Joseph Campbell, just an amazing author and writer, and he explored all of the complex worlds of mythology. One of the most inspirational figures for me uh, for many, many years and continues to be. I always kind of go back to a lot of his work and read a lot of his stuff. And I see a lot of things that I love now, how his general philosophy and outlook are, completely reflected in that, and that how ahead of his time he was. And the other figure that is probably the biggest influence on me is Anton LaVey from the Church of Satan. He was the founder of the Church of Satan. Same way that Joseph Campbell inspired me then as a kid to now as an adult. Uh, just an overall philosophical source of inspiration. So that's a pretty wacky list, but it's those three guys. And so growing up, I loved action movies. I loved Bruce Lee movies, Enter the Dragon, and I got into Chuck Norris. All the old school Hong Kong, all the movies that came out of China, all the great classic, martial arts movies that came out. That was all stuff I was raised on. But the thing that was really funny was that this movie Ninja 3, The Domination, this to me was a totally unique movie because this movie was like at the time I was into martial arts movies, uh, kung fu movies, growing up as a kid, and I was also really into horror films. And this was like the first time I saw a movie where it was essentially a horror film mixed in with a martial arts movie. And it also introduced me to ninja movies. And I became obsessed after seeing this movie with ninja movies. And I still love those classic 80s ninja movies. Most note the probably the biggest figure in that entire world was Sho Kosugi, who was in virtually every ninja-oriented movie of the time. Enter the Dragon, American Ninja, Revenge of the Ninja. I mean, endless titles. He was in even in the TV show The Master, which is awesome. I want to do a show on that one. You know, they're all terrible movies, but they're just amazing too. And Enter Ninja 3 The Domination was like a combination of horror and and the whole like ninja aesthetic. And I remember as a kid seeing that, I was just like blown away. Like, wow, like that's a thing. Like you can fuse those two things together. And that opened up the floodgates for me as far as like that was my first like movie that I saw that technically was about these ninja warriors. So, and I've never, you know, in that entire world of all of the ninja movies that I was watching at that time, I never saw any other films since then, or even till now, that like were horror based. And this film was, you know, just integral to that, and integral to my introduction to ninja movies. And it remains today, you know, one of my favorite because I consider it a total exploitation movie. It came out in 1984. It was directed by Sam Firstenberg, and it was released and produced by Canon. And Canon, if you don't know who Canon is or was, Canon was a big film company that specialized in all of these kind of weird, super cheesy martial arts movies in the 80s. Particularly, like they did all of the movies that were essentially about ninjas, and they did a whole slew of movies, but they were kind of like an exploitation company. Really, they just capitalized on this niche of fans and kids that just loved these movies. And Sho Kosugi was like the star of all of these movies. And they were, you know, they eventually went bankrupt and kind of died a horrible death. But they had a wave of about 10 years where they were putting out so many freaking movies. And Sam Firstenberg was a big director. He did numerous movies in that for Canon. But just, you know, iconic. It was, you know, for what it is. It's an iconic uh, company, and you know what they did. They definitely left their mark. Ninja 3: The Domination starred Lucinda Dickey, Sho Kosugi, like I just mentioned, Jordan Bennett, Dale Ishimoto, and James Hong, and David Chung, and Mo Mosley. In this movie, I bought this edition of this film about a year or two ago, and I remember I was at Bull Moose, and again I had seen this like I don't know how many times on VHS, and it was always like kind of crappy VHS, and the quality was never that great. And I remember being at Bull Moose and I saw this in the aisle. I was just like, "You got to be kidding me!" And I literally, I think I said it out loud that there was like a remastered version of this, and the price was really great. It was only like $10, and that it was out on Blu-ray. I was just like, "Oh my god!" And I instantly bought it. And I've seen this movie since I bought it on Blu-ray like a bazillion times. And there's there's a cool like commentary, and there's some special features on here where they talk about the way this film kind of came about, and the whole kind of idea around it, and it's super hilarious. And to me, like, that's why I consider this film to be an exploitation movie. I mean, yeah, it's got all of the other kind of it's got all of the other aspects that I feel like that lend itself to being a movie that you could kind of consider to be that kind of or that would lend itself to for a film to kind of fall in that category. Is like the acting is pretty atrocious. The script is like, just it's got all these holes in it, and it makes sense, but then it doesn't. The action is like pretty cheesy. The special effects are super cheesy. It's super low budget, but at the same time, it's just so damn fun, and it's because it's so bad, it's so damn good, and it's clearly, I feel like it's a film that wasn't taken so seriously, but yet it's still great, and I think it's definitely out of like the early '80s exploitation movies. It's one of my all-time favorites. Uh, and there's a like I said, there's a really great documentary or actually interview. There's not a whole lot of special features on here, but there's a really great commentary track with the director Sam Firstenberg, and he was talking about how he was persuaded by Canon Pictures, the Canon Group, to make this movie, and the reason was their whole idea, like when they presented this whole idea of doing a film that was like a horror movie slash ninja movie, was they wanted to. This was came out about 3 or 4 years after the original Exorcist came out, that was directed by William Friedkin. And The Exorcist obviously was a massive commercial hit. It was kind of a cultural phenomenon. It scared the shit out of everyone. And that movie was is has completely has a notorious reputation, and rightfully so. But Canon, because of the success of this movie, they were making all of these ninja movies, but they wanted to capitalize on that and somehow make a movie about demonic possession, but have the backdrop be centered on these like ninja warriors. And so that's what they did. They set out to make The Exorcist, but thrown in this martial arts world. And that's essentially what it is. The lead, one of the lead girls, the lead actress in this film, she essentially comes across this ninja who eventually gets killed, and his spirit takes over her body, and then she becomes this like possessed ninja warrior, and it's hilarious, and it's completely ridiculous and so silly, but so awesome. And this film has that notorious scene, like the opening sequence, that I think is, even though it's so cheesy and terrible, I think if you're a fan of action movies, and you don't even have to necessarily be a fan of ninja movies, but I think it's probably one of the best fight sequences ever in film history. Like, I put it up there with like anything, you know, that's like considered to be high level filmmaking. Even though this movie is really terrible, I think that the opening sequence, it's called, well, it's basically the golf course scene of where this ninja assassin is sent to uh, to kill all these people, and they're all like playing golf basically, and the police are involved. He kills all of these people, and it's like a total bloodbath. And eventually, the police are called in, and then the police are all slaughtered, and it just goes on and on. And it's about 20 minutes. This whole episode, this whole sequence of this giant, and the choreography is actually really awesome, of this giant sequence, and it's all done. I believe it was all done in like just one or two takes. There's all these long shots with helicopters, and it's amazing. I think it's one of the greatest action sequences like ever in film history, and that's the opening of the movie. And that's just it's gold. It's worth checking out. The rest of the movie, sure, after that, 20 minutes isn't up to par, but it's still entertaining as hell. But that sequence, I just think, is breathtaking. I just think it's just amazing. And to see that this movie got a Blu-ray release is just crazy, just awesome. And the quality of this is awesome. Like, again, I grew up watching this on like kind of crappy VHS tape, and also it was on cable for a while as a kid. But to see it and own it on Blu-ray was a dream realized. So I highly recommend it. 1984, uh, Ninja Ninja Cheese 101 with a whole bunch of horror elements, particularly around demonic possession thrown in. It's just fantastic. Super entertaining. A great movie to watch if you're drinking lots of alcohol with your friends or not. But just a great movie. It's one of my all-time favorite exploitation movies from the '80s. Just a fun ride, like a truly fun ride to the amusement park or ride in the amusement park. So this is Jason Dean. So thanks again to everybody checking out this channel, and we will see you next time. Peace.